how early fame shapes long-term celebrity careers. Before the world knows their name, they are still children. Before the contracts, the cameras, and the global spotlight, there is still a developing mind, learning identity, boundaries, and purpose. But what happens when fame arrives too early? When applause replaces anonymity? When performance becomes expectation? And when growing up happens under constant public observation? Early success can open extraordinary doors. It can create wealth, opportunity, and influence. But it can also reshape decision-making, emotional development, and long-term career direction in ways that are not always visible to the audience. In this video, we explore the structural and psychological impact of early fame. Not to judge, not to speculate, but to better understand the long-term patterns that often follow. Because sometimes the most important part of a career is how it begins. Let's take a closer look. How early fame shapes long-term celebrity careers before global recognition. There is a normal childhood, routine, school, privacy, gradual growth. But for some individuals, that timeline shifts dramatically. Success arrives early, exposure becomes constant, and identity begins forming under public observation. Early fame is often celebrated as extraordinary achievement, and in many ways it is. But what is less discussed is how accelerated visibility influences long-term development. Tonight we are exploring that question through a structured lens, examining patterns that frequently appear when public careers begin too soon. This is not about judgment. It is not about criticism. It is about understanding how environment shapes outcome. The development gap psychologists often describe adolescence as a critical identity-building stage. It is the period where individuals experiment, make mistakes privately, and slowly define who they are. Now imagine that process unfolding in front of millions. When a child or teenager becomes widely recognized, their growth does not pause, but it does become public. Interviews replace informal conversations. Professional expectations replace exploration. Brand identity can begin forming before personal identity fully stabilizes. Over time, this creates what experts sometimes call a development gap. The outer image matures rapidly while the inner self is still catching up. For some, strong support systems prevent imbalance. For others, the pressure accelerates decision-making before emotional readiness has fully developed, and that early acceleration can quietly influence long-term career direction. Financial maturity versus sudden income. Another factor often associated with early fame is sudden wealth. Significant earnings at a young age can create opportunity, but also responsibility. Financial literacy typically develops gradually through experience. However, early fame compresses that timeline. Major contracts, sponsorship deals, and management agreements may be signed before full comprehension of long-term implications. In some documented cases across the entertainment industry, early contract structures have significantly impacted future earnings potential. This is not unique to any one individual. It is a structural pattern. When financial growth outpaces financial education, long-term sustainability can become more complex. The issue is not wealth itself, but timing. Public expectation and identity lock-in. Early success can also create what we might call identity lock-in. When audiences fall in love with a specific image, a child actor, a young musician, a breakout star, that image can become difficult to evolve. The public often resists change, but growth requires change. As a result, some early stars face a challenging transition period in adulthood, rebrand successfully, or remain confined to an earlier version of themselves. That tension can influence creative decisions, career risks, and personal direction. Again, this is not universal, but it is common enough to observe as a pattern. So what does all this tell us? Early fame is not inherently harmful, but it is inherently intense. And intensity, when introduced during formative years, can amplify both strengths and vulnerabilities. Next, we look at how industry structure, media cycles, and long-term career planning intersect with early recognition, and why some individuals adapt successfully while others struggle with transition. Let's continue. Transitioning from child star to adult professional history offers several examples of how early fame shapes long-term career trajectories. Take the case of Drew Barrymore, who entered the spotlight at a very young age following her breakout role in E.T. Early recognition brought enormous visibility, but also intense public scrutiny during formative years. Her transition into adulthood required reinvention. Over time, she successfully repositioned herself, moving from child actress to leading roles and eventually into production and talk show hosting. Her trajectory illustrates an important principle. Early fame does not determine outcome, but adaptation determines longevity. Now consider someone like Macaulay Culkin, whose childhood success in Home Alone created global recognition almost overnight. For years, he stepped away from mainstream acting. That pause in itself is revealing. Sometimes stepping back becomes a strategy, a way to regain autonomy after early overexposure. In recent years, his selective return to entertainment reflects a more controlled approach to visibility. Again, we see a pattern. Early fame creates intensity. Long-term careers often require recalibration. Financial structures and contract control. Another instructive case is Toni Braxton, who achieved major success in the early 1990s. Despite strong album sales, she later spoke publicly about contract structures and financial strain. Her experience highlights a critical factor in early success. Revenue visibility does not always equal retained earnings. In entertainment industries, contract complexity can shape long-term financial outcomes. When early fame intersects with long-term agreements signed during rapid career ascent, financial management becomes especially crucial. This is not unique to one artist. It reflects industry structure. The lesson is structural awareness. Time's identity evolution and public expectation. Consider Daniel Radcliffe, widely recognized for portraying Harry Potter during his formative years. After such an iconic role, many assumed he would remain permanently associated with that identity. Instead, he deliberately chose unconventional projects, independent films, theater roles, diverse genres. That strategic diversification reflects conscious identity evolution. Rather than resisting early association, he expanded beyond it. This pattern demonstrates that early fame creates a starting point, but career design determines the next chapter. When transition becomes difficult, not all transitions are smooth. In some cases, early visibility can make adulthood adjustment more complex. Former child performers have described challenges navigating independence after years of structured schedules and managed environments. When adolescence occurs inside a professional system, decision-making autonomy can develop differently. Again, this is not about sensationalism. It is about recognizing that rapid exposure changes developmental context. The spotlight accelerates certain skills, performance, discipline, media presence, but may compress other areas of growth. The outcome varies depending on support systems, mentorship, and personal resilience. To pattern beneath the pattern, when we zoom out, a consistent theme emerges. Early fame amplifies everything. It amplifies opportunity. It amplifies income. It amplifies pressure. It amplifies mistakes. What determines long-term trajectory is rarely the fame itself, but the infrastructure surrounding it. Family guidance, financial literacy, contract negotiation, emotional support, career planning, those variables quietly shape sustainability. In the final section, we'll examine the long-term lessons early fame offers, not only for entertainers, but for anyone navigating rapid success in any field. Because while the spotlight may be unique, the principles of growth, identity, and adaptation are universal. Let's bring it together. Beyond the spotlight, when we look at the full picture, one truth becomes clear. Early fame is neither a guarantee of lifelong success, nor a sentence to instability. It is a multiplier. It magnifies opportunity, it magnifies exposure, and it magnifies the consequences of decisions, both wise and premature. For those surrounded by strong mentorship, financial education, and emotional support, early recognition can evolve into sustainable influence. For others, the adjustment period may take longer. And sometimes stepping away becomes part of the growth process. What the public often sees is the headline moment, the breakout role, the hit song, the viral performance. But what truly shapes long-term careers happens quietly, over time. It happens in contract negotiations, in personal boundaries, in identity development, in the decision to evolve rather than remain frozen in a single era. A broader perspective, this pattern extends beyond entertainment. The takeaway, so perhaps the question is not, does early fame ruin careers? A more useful question might be, how does early fame reshape the path, and what determines whether that path remains stable? Because when identity is allowed to mature, when finances are managed with foresight, and when evolution is embraced rather than resisted, longevity becomes possible. And when those structures are absent, transition becomes more complex. Early fame is powerful, but long-term success is rarely accidental. It is built carefully, intentionally, and often quietly, long after the spotlight first turns on. And if stories like this make you think deeper about fame, money, and human behavior, pause for a second and support this channel. Hit the like button. If you enjoyed this documentary, share this video with someone who loves deep, meaningful storytelling. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Celebrity Unscreened. Turn on the notification bell so you never so you never miss our next deep dive into the psychology behind fame, money, and human behavior. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we study what happens behind them. Thank you for watching.